Hello. Welcome to episode 66 of Dark Academia for Insomniacs. My name is Breezy. I am your host, your beautiful redheaded host here, who's very stubborn as a mule, who refuses to give up. And I'm not gonna lie to y'all. My my dirty little secret, I enjoy watching the Kardashians. Don't judge me. Please don't judge me. Um, I get I like knowing how it's not the lifestyle I envy. It's just I like to their drama is reality TV. What can I say? But if you're new here, hit that like button, ring that bell for notifications. Also, please subscribe. Help a girl out. Um, Today we're going to be talking about Splatterpunk. Now, do y'all remember the scene? And it was Criminal Minds, and I think it was early in the seasons. It was after Rossi joined, and it was when Garcia drug Reed to a convention. Does that ring a bell? Yes. So when I was doing this research, it just made me think of that episode for some reason. And Rossi goes, "I love you both, but this is my day off." And I love Rossi, but I will forever be a Morgan Garcia girl. However, I'm also really in love with Spencer Reed, Dr. Spencer Reed. Who is it? Okay, hear me out. Hear me out. Give me a guy who talks to me like Morgan talks to Garcia. Wouldn't mind like Dr. Spencer Reed. Does that not scream sexy and attractive? I would say so. I'm also very weird and not very normal. If you ask anybody who knows me, just saying. But yeah. But with that being said, why don't I dive into today's episode? Okay. Um, Today we are going to be talking about Splatterpunk. And you're probably wondering, what is Splatterpunk? Well, um, Splatterpunk is a movement that started within the horror fiction, originating from 1980s, and it is distinguished between graphic and often gory depiction of violence, counterculture and alignment, hyper-intensive horror with no limits, and the term that was coined in 1986 by David J. Show in the 12th World Fantasy Convention in Providence, Rhode Island. Now, splatterpunk is also regarded as a revolt against the traditional meeky suggestive horror story, and splatterpunk has also been defined as a literary genre characterized by graphically described scenes, often seen in gory nature. I personally love stuff like that. Maybe that's why I like Bones so much, any crime show. Also, could explain why I love true crime. Anyway, with that being said, Michael. So there's a short story by Michael Shea called The Autopsy from 1980. It is often described as proto splatterpunk. Um, and basically, splatterpunk provoked considerable controversy among horror writers. Robert Bloch criticized the movement, arguing that there is a distinction to be made by which inspires terror to which inspires nausea. William F. Nolan and Charles L. Grant also censored the movement, and critics like R.S. Hadji and Philip Nutman also praised the movement in the later describing splatterpunk as a survivalist literature that reflects on the moral chaos of our times. I personally like splatterpunk, if I'm being honest with you. Now, through the term, it gained some prominence in the 1980s and 1990s, and it attracted a cult following. The term splatterpunk has since been replaced by other synonymous terms in the genre. The last major commercial endeavor of aim for splatterpunk audience was the 1995 Splatterpunk's second Over the Edge, an anthology of a short-lived, which also includes essays on horror cinema, and an interview with Anton LaVey. Now, by 1998, one commentator suggests an interest in splatterpunk was declining. saying it seemed to have reached its peak in the mid 1990s. And the term is still sometimes used for the horror of the gruesome. In 2018, the organizers of KillerCon, I shouldn't have been smiling about that, established the Splatterpunk Awards to honor those in the fields of splatterpunk and extreme horror. And an author who won the Splatterpunk medal for this novel, Full Brutal, was Christopher Triana. Now, throughout tradition and associated with literature, splatterpunk has also gained influence on other media, and namely video, in the coffin of Andy Laley, a 2023 indie horror game notoriety from its expansion and initially banned in Australia due to its controversial themes. And the genre was later reinstated as a rated 18 plus due to its primarily splatter spawn characteristics, such as gore, high impact violence, and the game is not first in splatterpunk genre within gaming, but is also more notable. Now, some genre writers would include um, Poppy Z. Bright, Jack Ketchum, Richard Lamb, J.F. Gonzalez, Joe Lansdale, Brian Keene, Richard Christopher Matheson, Robert R. McCannon, Shane McKenzie, Ralph James Wright, David J. Snow, who is described as the father of splatterpunk by Richard Christian Matheson, John Skip, Greg Spector, Edward Lee, Wade Garton, Dan Schrader, and Michael Boatman, and some commentators also regard Cass Croger as a splatterpunk writer. Now, let's talk about the aesthetic of it, shall we? In the history, some of the history, like I just did. So, splatterpunk is a 1980s horror literary movement characterized by its graphic and explicit distinction between violence and gore, which emerged in the counterculture rebellion against a more subtle traditional horror, whereas the aesthetic is defined by a confrontational style, which uses shock violence, often alongside taboo themes like sexual violence, to confront societal anxieties and the ugliness beneath civilization's polished surface. And the term was coined in 1986 by David J. Schro. Now, the origin began in the 1980s, and it was for a desire to push boundaries in horror movies in a reaction of a conservative political climate perceived as a quiet horror subgenre. Now, it was started a rebellion with authors who rejected meekly suggestive style of traditional horror, choosing instead of explicitly derailed gruesome events. And as I said, some key figures would include Clive Barker, Jack Ketchum, John Skip, Craig Spector, David J. Chow, and Joe Lansdale. And some key works would include Clive Barker's Book of Blood, The Midnight Meat Train, and John Skip's and Greg Spector's The Light in the End. So, now let's talk about the aesthetic, right? Well, it is graphic and explicit, and the core aesthetic is direct, uncensored depiction violence, gore, and mutilation with no sense to be subtle. And counterculture is deeply tied to a countercultural stance, meaning using shock and extreme content to protest people and political norms. Purposeful gore, while gory, the violence is often intended to serve as a thematic purpose, such as exposing those dark aspects of humanity and exploring social issues like corruption and breakdown of decency. And it's beyond, so basically, and beyond the suggestion, is unlike white horror, Splatterpunk sprays um, monstrosities in graphic detail to confront the writer, and is provocative and transgressive. It is often ta- incorporates taboo thoughts like sexual violence to shock and provoke the audience. I personally love Splatterpunk. I know it's a bit controversial, and there's someone who's gonna say maybe you should like, yeah, get over yourself. I'm gonna like what I like. You like what you like, and I don't judge. Unless you put pineapple on your pizza. And I'll say that again. You open yourself up to judgment for that one. But yeah. But no, I personally love horror movies. For me personally, the gorier the better. But that's just me on that, honestly. And I know a lot of people may not care for that too much, but I do. And not everyone likes the same thing. And I think as a society, we can all agree that we do what we want, we like what we want, and we don't have to like the same thing. But that is it for this episode. Join me next time as we talk about neo Victorian um nism. But y'all have a great day and a happy Thanksgiving if this episode does not come out before Thanksgiving.